So, we've discussed fiscal policy, and I hope in that unit 5, you've got a greater understanding of some of the things that the central bank does in Nigeria, some of the decisions that the central bank governor has made, and some of the difficulties really that the fiscal team, the president, and the economic committee, some of the things that they're grappling with right now, especially the first slide, like all the complex, balances and trade-offs that they have to think about while putting together economic policy. It's difficult stuff. It's not an exact science. There's no correct answer. So yeah, these are some of the things to think about. Now, gosh, we're almost ending after this unit. I only have two more, and then that's it. You guys are all macroeconomic experts, so let's go. Let's get into unit 6, which is about expectations, inflation, and interest rates. And in this module, I'll be talking about the yield curve, I'll be talking about the Phillips curve, I'll be talking about the natural rate of unemployment, and I'll be talking about time inconsistency and the role of expectations in the effectiveness of monetary policy. And I particularly love the last bit because you can see how, it's economics is about human behavior, and you can see how human beings can kind of mess up what you're trying to do. So here we go, the yield. So we're gonna start with Ricardian equivalence. I forgot I actually put this thing first because it's my favorite bit. And this reminds me of a whiz kid. And there's a common saying in Nigeria, which is Ojoro Council. And Ojoro is basically like when somebody tries to play a trick on you. An Ojoro council means like, okay, one person is trying to play a trick on you, and then you play another trick back on the person, and they say that the tricks have cancelled out. Ojoro council, and that's the sort of demonstration, I guess, a funny demonstration of Ricardian equivalence. I actually thought I started this unit off with the yield curve, but I put my favorite bit first because this is one of my favorite sort of economic phenomena. So what is Ricardian equivalence? It's an economic theory that argues that attempts to stimulate the economy by increasing debt-financed government spending are going to fail because they don't stimulate the economy in the way that governments expect. The theory argues that consumers will save any money that they receive in order to pay for the future tax increases that they believe will be levied to pay off the debt. So this is like Ojoro Council. The government borrows loads of money, and tries to use it to stimulate the economy, right? That's what fiscal policy does, and that's sort of the background of all the Keynesian theories, right? You've got to use money to stimulate the economy. You've got to borrow when the economy is in a downturn, and then just throw it out into the economy and make people spend. But actually, what the theory of Ricardian equivalence says is people are smart. People know that the government is going to have to raise taxes after um, to pay back the money that they borrowed. So instead of people spending, they just keep it. And they think, okay, you people think you're smart, but we know that you borrowed the money to give us so that we'll spend. And we're not going to spend because we know that you're going to raise taxes after to pay back the money that you borrowed to spend. So that's really the theory of Ricardian equivalence. And you sometimes see that happen in developed countries. A lot of economists argue over whether how relevant it is or not, but it's just something to bear in mind. The next thing that's sort of important is the Phillips curve. And the Phillips curve is an observed sort of relationship between unemployment and inflation. And it says that the lower the level of unemployment, the higher the level of inflation tends to be. And this is called the Phillips curve. And it's important to know it's still really widely quoted in economics textbooks, so it's something to know about what the Phillips curve is and what it means. But in Nigeria, we know that that's not true. Because here in Nigeria, we have high inflation and high unemployment. So the Phillips curve kind of says that you'll get the best of both worlds, but we know it's a lie. It's possible to have the worst of both worlds. So we have high inflation and high unemployment. So we don't obey the Phillips curve, but it's an interesting sort of historical thing for us to remember when people are talking about the Phillips curve in economics. It's useful. The yield curve. So I've put a picture of Toronto at the top because, like, Nigerians seem a lot of Nigerians, a huge proportion of Nigerians seem to have lost hope in the country and they're moving to Canada. And I'll tell you why that's relevant to the yield curve. So the yield curve is a line that plots yields, so interest rates of bonds that have different maturity rates. So a normal yield curve is one in which, okay, the longer maturity bonds have a high yield compared to the shorter term bonds due to the risks associated with time. So if you have like a bond that's going to mature in 10 years, it usually has a higher yield to the shorter term bonds in an inverted yield curve, and you can hear them on CNN, CNBC, channels TV talking about, oh my God, the yield curve is inverting, it's getting inverted, panic. You know what they're talking about really is an inverted yield curve is where short-term yields are actually higher than long-term yields, meaning people like are necessarily like they're losing faith in the economy, right? They they want higher yields in the short term, but in the long term, the yields are low because people don't really have confidence in the future. So it starts to invert. And that can be a sign of an upcoming recession, and that's what people obsess over on every like news channel that talks about finance. Oh my gosh, like the yield curve is beginning to invert. Disaster is looming, and I think that this is really really relevant to Nigeria in our psychological state as young people right now, because people do have at least a mental yield curve. The mass emigration of doctors, the mass emigration of technology professionals, the amount of brain drain, not just in Nigeria, but in the whole of Africa, means that, we do have some kind of mental yield curve. Everybody is moving. People don't believe in the future of Africa as much anymore. People want to go and live better lives abroad. People are even taking pay cuts to go and live abroad for the stability, for healthcare, for electricity, for a better standard of living. And that means that people aren't thinking it's going to get better, which is really worrying. So even if our financial yield curve is not inverted, I'm definitely seeing signs that our mental yield curve as young people is kind of inverting. And that's quite serious because you want people to have faith in the future. You want our smartest people to stay and build the country. And that's not really happening as much as one would hope. The last is a flat or humped yield curve, which means the short and long term yields are very close to each other. And that's a predictor of an economic transition, like between a recession and sort of improvement in the economy. Very, very important concept, probably the most important slide in this unit. So look at the different shapes and know the different shapes, and hopefully next time you're watching Channels TV, you'll be able to say, yeah, yeah, I know what that means. Okay, this is a bit on unemployment. Unemployment is something that a lot of young Nigerians are very, very familiar with, too familiar with. And these are just a few definitions of the different types of unemployment. So the unemployment rate is the unemployment rate that exists sort of when an economy is at full employment output. Um, when an economy is in recession and the current unemployment rate is higher than the natural rate. So during expansions, the current unemployment rate is less than the natural rate. And the natural rate, the NRU, is a really sort of important term in economics, and it's equal to the sum of just frictional and structural unemployment. Um, so when an economy is producing an efficient amount of output, the unemployment rate will be equal to the natural rate of unemployment, the NRU. So I'll explain the different types of unemployment. So the seasonal unemployment, that's just okay, there's summer jobs and there's some jobs that just don't come in different seasons. There's cyclical unemployment, and that's due to sort of recessions. When the country is in recession, obviously it's due to the cycle of the economy. There's frictional unemployment when people are kind of between jobs, like okay, you've just done your NYC job and you're looking for like the next step in your career, and you're thinking of staying at home a bit and like just trying to find out, okay, you don't want to stay in this like village where they posted you for NYC. What other options are there in Port Harcourt or Newry, or maybe you want to move up north to kind of, it's just you're in that period where you're between jobs. And then structural unemployment is the unemployment that comes from like increased productivity in some area. So your local restaurant, for instance, has decided to start using robots instead of human beings, so you lose your job. But the economy has become more productive because of that, but you don't have a job because you don't have the skills. So it's all about, and you haven't developed skills in maybe maintaining robots or AI or whatever they need the robots to do. So that's the unemployment that comes from lack of skills. So yeah, NRU is equal to the sum of frictional plus structural unemployment. And the overall unemployment rate is calculated by dividing the total number of unemployed people by the total people in the labor force. And the labor force is only working age adults that want to be employed. So the labor force doesn't include people that aren't looking for a job. One issue around the measurement of the labor force is that it excludes discouraged workers. So discouraged workers are people that have been looking for a job for ages and they're tired, so they just stay at home. Again, I'm sure we all know somebody like that. They're not included in the labor force because they're not actively looking for work, but they were. They just got tired, man. Like life is hard, so they stopped looking for work, and they are not included in this measure of the labor force. But anyway, that's how to calculate the overall unemployment rate, which is the total number of unemployed people divided by the number of people in the labor force. To calculate the natural rate, you have to first add the number of frictionally unemployed people to the people that are structurally unemployed, and then divide that by the total labor force, and that will give you the NRU. NRU is really important. Know how to calculate it. People talk about it a lot. And there we are. This is a picture of like a car that's now being made by robots instead of human beings. And this is an example of structural unemployment where like, there are jobs maybe in AI, in like advanced robotics, how to maintain the robots, how to manufacture the robots. But obviously the people that were doing the cars by hand, making the cars by hand, probably don't have the skills of manufacturing, like helping maintaining robots. So they become unemployed structurally.